Alistair, global growth has been slashed in 70% of economies. But gold, silver and platinum prices will buck the broader trend, increasing by more than 30% in 2025, this article says. The World Bank said in a press release on Tuesday, a global recession is not expected. Nevertheless, if forecasts for the next 2 years materialize, average global growth in the first 7 years of the 2020s will be the slowest of any decade since the 1960s. My point here is the 1950s and the 1960s were the greatest gold standard months after the Second World War. We had lots of growth. So what they're saying is the 1950s and the 60s were far better than the fiat currency decades of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and so on. What's your thoughts there?
I think that's a very, very good point. I think the difference is that in the 50s and 60s, we were actually paying down debt. Or if we weren't paying it down, we had the growth in the GDP, which meant that debt to GDP numbers basically improved over the whole period. In other words, without going into the reasons for that, in other words, there wasn't a debt problem. Today, there is a debt problem. The debt problem, I think, is greater than anything else. If you look at government debt to GDP, I mean, it is common to see them around about 100% or even more. I mean, America in particular, you've got Britain, you've got France, you've got Spain. And then, of course, you've got Italy at about 140%. You've got Japan running at some incredible figure like 250 or 280%, depending on your estimate of GDP. I think that there is a further problem in this, and that is that trying to use GDP as an indication of economic activity is actually very, very limited in terms of its application. All GDP is the amount of credit deployed in the economy, measured, if you like, by GDP. Now, that credit, its purchasing power can change quite a bit. It can be inflated by government spending, which artificially boosts GDP. And the other thing is you just don't know where that credit or how that credit is being deployed. Is it being deployed by consumers who are drawing down on their savings and spending their savings, or who have no savings and basically are increasing their credit card obligations? There are all these problems which actually the GDP measure just glosses over. But there is one thing which really matters above anything else with this GDP story, and that is that it has got to support the level of government debt outstanding. The only way it can do that is if private sector GDP, in other words, GDP stripped of government deficits in particular, if that is growing at a rate to sustain the level of debt, then fine. But the moment private sector GDP is no longer doing that, you are in a debt trap. And that debt trap basically leads to the end of the currency, of a fiat currency. And that's the problem we have. So we can quite easily see that GDP might grow by an amount, a lot of that due to government deficits. It doesn't tell you what the underlying economic situation is, and nor does it address the problem of debt traps. You can inflate your way out of trouble, was what they used to say. But on the other hand, unless you've got the genuine economic activity underpinning the growth in the level of GDP, you're not going to inflate your way out of the debt problem. So I think basically the takeaway on this is that we are likely to see in the coming months, I think we're likely to see this debt bubble begin to implode. The other side of debt, of course, is credit, because for every debt, there is a credit. So as the debt bubble contracts, credit will start contracting. And then we are really in trouble, because you'll find that the increase in credit, which has supported the value of financial assets, such as equities, bonds, and so on and so forth, starts disappearing. So their values start going down as well. And we have today precisely the same conditions that we had in 1929, when we had a debt bubble, evidenced by the credit bubble, the roaring 20s, which particularly were 26, 27, and 28, and into 29. And at the same time, we had the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which, combined with the collapsing debt and credit bubble, led to Wall Street falling by roughly 90% between September 1929 and the middle of 1932. This should worry us. We have almost exactly the same conditions today. The only difference being that the currencies are fiat and they're not on the gold standard.
Yeah.
This means the value of the currencies will not stay up in face of a collapse of the credit bubble, credit debt bubble, and the implication of the implications, if you like, of tariffs and the responses to tariffs, because this will be a tariff war, I think, apart from anything else.
Well, the point that you've always mentioned, Alistair, to finish this one off, the point is that, and you brought to my attention, is that especially in the United States, there's an interest bill to be paid on the debt. And you've told me how the interest just gets rolled over. So America does not pay the debt. It just gets rolled over and makes it even worse. And the GDP will never be able to survive at that level.